He lifted the wire request between two fingers as though it carried disease. $1 million? From you? Miller said. The words dripped through the hushed marble lobby of Prescott and Bain, loud enough for the white couple behind her to hear, for the junior analyst to flinch, for the receptionist to avert her eyes. Miller's smile was a scalpel, precise and cruel. We are not Western Union. We are not your neighborhood bank. We deal with clean money, real money, Miller said. He dropped her folder, papers scattered across Italian tile. I don't know how you people get that kind of money, lottery, tips, whatever it is this week, but it won't move through my firm, Miller said. Security took a step closer. His final words were delivered like a benediction. Leave. Your presence ruins the atmosphere, Miller said. Naomi's jaw flexed once, her knuckles white against her briefcase handle, but her eyes remained steady, unblinking, memorizing every face in that lobby. He had no idea what he'd just triggered, but to understand how it came to this, we need to go back 3 weeks. The morning light through Naomi's office window was the color of winter honey, pale and cold. She signed the interagency coordination memo with a fountain pen, her signature economical and precise. The nameplate on her desk faced away from the door, but the U.S. Treasury seal mounted on the wall behind her caught the light. Eagle and scales, authority rendered in brass. Her assistant knocked twice before entering. The foundation wire is scheduled for the 15th, the assistant said, setting down a slim folder. Prescott and Bain confirmed receipt of the compliance documentation yesterday. Their analyst, a Mr. Jones, called it textbook clean. Naomi nodded once, barely a movement. She wore a charcoal suit with no logos, no jewelry except a simple watch. Everything about her suggested discipline, the kind that comes from years of being underestimated and refusing to bend. Thank you, Patricia, Naomi said. When the assistant left, Naomi opened the folder. Inside, bank references, foundation charter documents, 3 years of audited financials for the literacy and healthcare initiative she'd built from nothing. $1 million, earned and saved over decades, ready to fund scholarships and clinics in underserved communities. The wire instruction was simple, the documentation pristine. Routine. She closed the folder and looked out at the gray November sky. Somewhere in the building, analysts were tracking cryptocurrency flows through nested shell companies in the Caymans. Somewhere, a sanctions evasion network was unraveling because a junior examiner had noticed an unusual pattern in correspondent banking records. Somewhere, the machinery of financial crime enforcement turned silently, relentlessly. Naomi had spent 23 years building that machinery, first as a line analyst, then as a supervisor, then progressively higher until the appointment came through. She rarely thought about the title anymore. It was simply who she was, the architect of systems designed to catch what others wanted to hide. But today she was just a woman trying to move her own money to help kids learn to read. She picked up her phone and dialed an extension 3 floors down. Marcus, it's Naomi, she said. The test is live. Prescott and Bain has the documentation. Understood, Marcus Chen replied. His voice was steady, professional. The secondary package goes out tomorrow. Different profile, different risk indicators. If they reject yours and approve that one, we'll have pattern evidence. And the whistleblower? Theodore Jones, junior compliance analyst, 3 years at the firm. He contacted the hotline 6 weeks ago with concerns about discriminatory client selection and pressure from senior leadership to approve questionable transactions. He's documented, he's credible, and he's terrified. Naomi's jaw tightened. Protect him. Whatever happens, his name stays sealed unless he chooses otherwise. Already arranged, full whistleblower safeguards. Good, Naomi said. She ended the call and returned to the window. Below, Washington moved through its ordinary rhythms. Tourists photographing monuments, staffers hurrying between buildings, the slow grind of government continuing regardless of what any individual thought or felt or planned. She'd been underestimated her entire career. Too young, too quiet, too black, too female. People looked at her and saw someone who didn't belong in rooms where decisions were made. And she'd learned to use that. Learned to let them dismiss her while she documented everything, built cases brick by brick, and waited for the moment when the system she'd built would speak in a voice no one could ignore. Miller didn't know her. Didn't know her title, her authority, her capacity for patience. He saw a black woman with a wire request and assumed she was nobody. That assumption was going to cost him everything. The lobby of Prescott and Bain occupied the ground floor of a glass tower in lower Manhattan. All white marble and recessed lighting, and the kind of hush that money buys. Naomi signed in at the security desk, her heels clicking across stone as she approached the reception area. A young woman with perfect hair smiled automatically, then faltered when she looked up. I have an appointment with compliance, Naomi said. Regarding a wire transfer. The documentation was submitted last week. Name? The receptionist asked. Naomi Clark. The receptionist's fingers moved across her keyboard and something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. One moment, please, the receptionist said. She lifted a phone, spoke quietly, hung up. Someone will be with you shortly. You can wait over there. Naomi moved to the waiting area, leather chairs, financial publications fanned across a glass table, a view of the street where yellow cabs fought for space. She sat, spine straight, hands folded over her briefcase. A white couple in their 60s entered behind her. The man in cashmere, the woman dripping with understated diamonds. The receptionist's smile widened instantly. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, the receptionist said. So wonderful to see you. Let me let Mr. Miller know you're here. Minutes passed. Naomi watched the second hand on the wall clock make one full revolution, then another. The Caldwells were shown to a private conference room within 90 seconds. An intern brought them coffee service on actual china. Naomi waited. She didn't check her phone, didn't fidget, didn't show impatience. She simply sat and observed. The receptionist's body language when different clients arrived, the way the security guard's eyes tracked certain visitors but not others, the subtle hierarchy of service that revealed itself in who got acknowledged first, who got offered coffee, who got smiled at with genuine warmth. This was data, all of it. When Miller finally appeared, he came through the interior doors like he owned the light itself. 52, silver at the temples, a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His smile was practiced, the kind that made clients feel chosen. He looked past Naomi, directly through her, as though she were made of glass, to scan the lobby for whoever was actually important. Then his eyes returned to her and the smile died. Can I help you? Miller asked. The warmth had drained from his voice completely. Naomi stood slowly, deliberately. I'm here about my wire transfer, Naomi said. Your compliance team approved the documentation. I was told to come in today to finalize. Miller's eyebrows rose a fraction. A wire transfer, Miller said. He said it the way someone might say a cockroach. And you are? Naomi Clark, I submitted... Wait here, Miller said. He turned and walked back through the interior doors without another word. Naomi sat down slowly, her jaw tight. Through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see Miller shaking hands with Mr. Caldwell, laughing at something Mrs. Caldwell said, pouring coffee himself like they were old family friends. His body language was completely different. Open, warm, engaged. The performance of respect and welcome. Naomi pulled out her phone and sent a single text to Marcus. Differential treatment confirmed. Visual evidence obtainable. The response came back within seconds. Recording? She typed. Lobby has cameras. Subpoena later. 15 minutes later, Miller returned. This time he carried a folder. Her folder, she recognized the foundation logo. And his face had hardened into something that looked like contempt, dressed up as professionalism. Ms. Clark, Miller said. He didn't sit. I've reviewed your submission. Your compliance department already... Compliance approves anything, Miller said. His voice rose slightly, just enough that the receptionist glanced over. They're overwhelmed, understaffed, and frankly, they lack the judgment that senior leadership brings to these relationships. He opened the folder, flipped through pages without really looking at them. You're proposing to wire $1 million, Miller said. Yes, for a charitable foundation. All the documentation is... I'm sure it is, Miller said. His smile now was thin, surgical. But documentation doesn't tell me what I need to know. Prescott and Bain has a reputation. We are not Western Union. We are not your neighborhood check cashing place. We deal with institutional clients, generational wealth, clean money that can withstand the highest scrutiny. The emphasis on clean landed like a slap. Naomi's hands tightened imperceptibly on her briefcase. My funds have been thoroughly vetted, Naomi said. I have bank references going back. $1 million is a lot of money, Miller interrupted. He was looking at her now with an expression she'd seen 1,000 times in her career. The expression of someone who'd already made up his mind and was just going through the motions of justification. For someone in your position, I don't know where you got it. Lottery ticket, inheritance, tips from whatever it is you do. But I'm not going to risk our license, our relationships with our custodian banks, our regulatory standing, to move money that raises questions. The lobby had gone silent. The receptionist was staring at her keyboard. An intern froze halfway through the door, and near the back, partially hidden behind a partition, A young black man in a junior analyst's badge, Mr. Jones, according to the ID clipped to his pocket, stood with his eyes down and his ears burning red. Your compliance team approved this wire, Naomi said quietly. Each word was a chip of ice. They ran the enhanced due diligence. They verified the source of funds. I don't care what compliance said, Miller said. His voice had risen to full volume now, filling the marble space. I am a senior partner here. I make the final call on relationships that could expose this firm, and I'm telling you. He lifted her folder with 2 fingers, held it away from his body like it was contaminated. This doesn't meet our standards, Miller said. What standards? Naomi asked. Her voice remained level, but something had shifted in her posture, a coiling of energy that people who knew her would recognize as dangerous. Specifically, what standards am I failing to meet? Miller's smile widened, showing teeth. The kind that protect firms like ours from people who don't understand how real wealth management works, Miller said. This isn't some community bank where you deposit your tips and write checks for groceries. This is serious business for serious people. He dropped the folder. Papers slid across the marble, her foundation charter landing face up, the mission statement about childhood literacy visible to everyone watching. I won't risk our license for you, Miller said. Whatever you're really doing with this money. I'm funding scholarships and medical clinics, Naomi said. Her voice was still quiet, but something in it made Miller's eyes flicker. Sure you are, Miller said. He looked at security, a small Asian man in his 30s who'd been standing by the elevator bank. Please escort Miss Clark out, and make a note that she's not to be admitted again. Sir, the security guard started, clearly uncomfortable. Now, Miller said. He looked back at Naomi. Leave. Your presence here ruins the atmosphere. You're upsetting our real clients. Naomi bent slowly and gathered her papers. Her hands were steady, but her knuckles had gone white. She slid the documents back into the folder, stood, and met Miller's eyes for 3 full seconds. He stared back, confident, satisfied, already dismissing her in his mind. Mr. Jones, the young analyst, had his hand pressed flat against the partition wall. His other hand was clenched into a fist at his side, trembling. Naomi turned and walked toward the exit. The security guard followed at a respectful distance, his face miserable. As the elevator doors closed, she saw Miller return to the conference room where the Caldwells were waiting, saw his smile snap back into place like a mask being adjusted. The doors sealed shut. In the descending elevator, Naomi pulled out her phone and made one call. It's me, Naomi said. He bit. The war room was 14 floors above street level in a federal building in D.C., windows overlooking the Treasury Department. 6 people sat around a table scattered with laptop computers, file folders, and cold coffee. One wall was covered in a network diagram, strings of colored yarn connecting names and institutions. Not literal yarn, but a digital projection that served the same purpose, showing flows and relationships and hidden connections. At the head of the table sat Marcus Chen, a career investigator whose reading glasses were perpetually sliding down his nose. To his left was Jennifer Moss, a forensic accountant who'd once traced a billion-dollar fraud through 17 layers of shell companies in 6 countries. To his right was David Okoye, an attorney who specialized in Bank Secrecy Act enforcement and had the kind of mind that could hold a dozen regulatory statutes in working memory simultaneously. The test wire went through custodian bank setup this morning, Jennifer said, tapping her laptop. Unique routing signature embedded in the Swift message. If they process it, we'll be able to track every hop, every correspondent, every clearing account it touches. And if they reject it, David asked? Then we know the bias was real and operational, Marcus said. He looked up from his notes. But we still need to prove they'd accept genuinely problematic funds. 1 data point proves discrimination. 2 data points prove systemic failure. A younger analyst, Sarah, just 2 years out of graduate school, spoke up from the end of the table. The high-risk client onboarding is queued for tomorrow, Sarah said. OFAC-adjacent indicators in the beneficial ownership chain, a correspondent bank in a high-risk jurisdiction, source of funds documentation that's technically sufficient but raises obvious questions. On paper, it meets the minimum compliance checklist, but any decent analyst should flag it for enhanced review. Will they flag it? Jennifer asked. We're about to find out, Sarah said. Marcus leaned back in his chair. I want to be clear about the stakes here, Marcus said. If this works, if they refuse the clean wire and accept the problematic one, we're talking about willful BSA violations, potential SEC investment advisor sanctions, correspondent banking relationship termination, the whole cascade. Lives get ruined. Miller ruined his own life when he turned bias into business practice, David said quietly. We're just documenting it. The door opened and Naomi entered. She'd changed from the charcoal suit into something even more austere. Black, no ornamentation, the kind of outfit that made people think of judges and verdicts. She set her briefcase down and looked at the network diagram on the wall. How bad was it? Marcus asked. Loud. Public. He made sure everyone in that lobby knew exactly what he thought of me, Naomi said. Her voice was flat, factual. Called my money dirty, implied it came from tips or lottery tickets, threw my foundation charter on the floor, had security escort me out. Jennifer's jaw tightened. Sarah looked down at her laptop, blinking rapidly. Mr. Jones was there, Naomi continued. The junior analyst who contacted the whistleblower hotline. I watched his face. He wanted to say something. He was ashamed. Not of me, of Miller, of what he was witnessing, of his own silence. We're protecting him, David said. Full whistleblower safeguards. When this breaks, his name stays sealed unless he chooses otherwise. Naomi nodded once. Timeline? Naomi asked. Marcus glanced at his notes. Test wire processes or rejects within 48 hours, Marcus said. High-risk client decision point is day after tomorrow. If both data points hit, we coordinate the takedown with DOJ, SEC, and the primary banking regulators within 72 hours. And the custodian bank? Naomi asked. Already briefed, Jennifer said. They'll cooperate fully. They're not thrilled that Prescott and Bain has been pushing through questionable transactions and blaming it on correspondent banking requirements. This gives them cover to sever the relationship. Naomi walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Miller was probably having drinks with clients, celebrating another successful day of protecting his firm's standards. Somewhere, Mr. Jones was sitting at his desk, wondering if he'd done the right thing by calling the hotline, wondering if anything would actually change. Make sure every document is airtight, Naomi said. Every memo, every email, every transaction record. When we move, it has to be overwhelming. No room for appeals, no room for him to claim misunderstanding. The system has to work exactly the way it was designed to work. It will, Marcus said. Naomi turned back to the room. Then let's make sure justice looks exactly like policy enforcement, Naomi said. Cold, professional, and absolutely devastating. Inside Prescott and Bain, the compliance department occupied a windowless suite on the 12th floor, far from the client-facing offices where Miller held court. 7 analysts sat in cubicles that smelled of burnt coffee and stress, processing client onboarding documents, transaction reports, and the endless stream of alerts generated by their AML monitoring software. Mr. Jones, Theodore Jones, though no one called him that, occupied the cubicle furthest from the door. He was 28, Columbia graduate, 3 years into a career that was supposed to lead to a senior compliance position, but had instead led to a chronic sense of nausea. On his desk was a framed photo of his mother, a schoolteacher in Baltimore, and a coffee mug that said World's Okayest Analyst, a gift from his sister. He was staring at that mug when his supervisor, Linda Chen, appeared at the cubicle entrance. The Clark Foundation wire, Linda said. Miller rejected it. Theodore looked up sharply. What? Theodore asked. We approved that last week. It was clean, textbook clean. I ran the full EDD protocol myself. Linda's expression was carefully neutral, the look of someone who'd learned to show nothing. He said it raised reputational concerns, Linda said. Reputational? Theodore stood up. Linda, that foundation has been operating for 6 years. Audited financials, board of directors that includes a former federal judge. The source of funds was fully documented salary and investment returns. There was nothing even remotely questionable. I know, Linda said. Then why? He stopped because he knew why. He'd been in that lobby yesterday morning, had watched Miller's face, had heard the words, your people and lottery tickets and ruins the atmosphere, had stood there like a coward while a black woman was publicly humiliated for the crime of having money and wanting to do good with it. There's something else, Linda said. She glanced over her shoulder, then stepped fully into the cubicle and lowered her voice. There's a new client onboarding request that just came through priority channels. Miller's pushing it personally. Investment fund out of the Caymans, beneficial ownership chain that includes entities in 3 different high-risk jurisdictions, and source of funds documentation that's technically sufficient. Technically sufficient meaning what? Theodore asked. Meaning it checks the boxes but doesn't actually tell you anything, Linda said. Bank reference letters that are real but vague. Investment returns that could be legitimate or could be layered. The OFAC screening came back negative, but there are enough fuzzy edges that we should be doing enhanced monitoring at minimum. Theodore felt his stomach drop. And Miller wants to approve it, Theodore said. He wants it approved by end of day tomorrow, Linda said. She met his eyes. Theodore, I need you to run the due diligence, and I need you to document everything, every step, every finding, every question you have. Put it all in writing. If I flag it for enhanced review, put it all in writing, Linda repeated. Her voice was steady, but her hand was shaking slightly where it gripped the cubicle wall. Do your job the way you were trained to do it. Let me worry about what happens next. After she left, Theodore sat down slowly. His hands moved across the keyboard, opening the new client file, and what he saw made his chest tight. The beneficial ownership structure was deliberately opaque. The correspondent bank was in a jurisdiction known for weak AML controls. The investment strategy documentation was generic to the point of meaninglessness. Any competent analyst would flag this. Any firm that actually cared about compliance would slow down, ask questions, demand clarity, but he already knew what would happen. Miller would call it being overly cautious, would say they couldn't spook the whale with too many questions, would remind everyone that they were in the business of serving high-net-worth clients, not interrogating them like criminals. Theodore opened a new email to Linda and began documenting his concerns. Every word felt like a small act of resistance, a tiny rebellion against a system that valued money over integrity. He saved the email, sent it, and then opened the secure browser he'd used 3 weeks ago to access the FinCEN whistleblower hotline. The message interface was simple, anonymous, encrypted. He typed, "New development. Firm rejected clean transaction from black client with perfect documentation. Same week, fast-tracking high-risk client with multiple red flags. Pattern is clear and documented. What do you need from me?" The response came back within an hour. Continue documenting. Every email, every memo, every decision point. We're building the case. You're protected. Thank you for your courage. Theodore stared at the word courage. It didn't feel like courage. It felt like the absolute minimum requirement of human decency. And even that felt like it might cost him his career. He pulled up the Clark Foundation file one more time, looking at the pristine documentation, the clear audit trail, the evidence of funds earned and saved over decades. Then he looked at the new client file with its shadows and gaps and deliberate obscurity. One was rejected, one was being fast-tracked. Theodore saved both files to an encrypted folder, backed them up to a secure cloud service, and went back to work. His hands were steady now. He knew what he was doing, knew the risks, knew that somewhere in a federal building in D.C., people were paying attention. The next 36 hours moved with bureaucratic slowness on the surface and frantic urgency underneath. Theodore processed the high-risk client application, documenting every concern, every gap in the documentation, every reason why enhanced due diligence should be required. He sent his findings to Linda, copied them to his encrypted backup, and waited. Miller's response came via Linda at 4:30 p.m. the next day. "Approve it," Linda said. She stood in his cubicle doorway with her arms crossed, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "Miller reviewed your concerns and determined their address by the custodian bank's monitoring. He wants the relationship finalized by close of business." "Linda, this is—" "I know," Linda said. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I know exactly what this is. Approve it. Document that you were overruled. Send me the memo. Do it now." Theodore's fingers moved across the keyboard. He typed the approval, attached his original findings, added a paragraph noting that senior leadership had reviewed and accepted the residual risks, and hit send. Within an hour, the high-risk client's first wire transfer, $2.3 million from a correspondent bank in Cyprus, cleared through Prescott and Bain's custodian and landed in the investment account. Theodore sat at his desk and felt the weight of complicity settle over him like ash. He'd done his job. He'd documented the problems. He'd been overruled. And now money that should have been scrutinized, questioned, possibly rejected, was sitting in an account bearing the firm's name. He sent another encrypted message to the whistleblower hotline. "High-risk client approved over my documented objections. First wire cleared today. Pattern complete. The response, evidence received, action imminent, stay vigilant." Theodore went home that night and couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Naomi Clark's face in that lobby, about Miller's smirk, about the casual cruelty of power wielded without accountability. He thought about his mother, who'd worked 30 years as a teacher in underfunded schools, who'd taught him that integrity wasn't optional even when it was expensive. He thought about what was coming and whether he'd survive it. 3 days later, Miller stood at the front of the grand ballroom at the Yale Club, champagne flute in hand, addressing a room full of wealth managers and compliance officers at the annual Private Wealth Management Summit. His smile was warm, his voice confident. His presentation slides featuring the Prescott and Bain logo and phrases like best-in-class compliance culture and integrity as a competitive advantage. The regulatory environment has never been more complex, Miller was saying, which is why firms like ours invest heavily in compliance infrastructure. We don't just check boxes. We build relationships of trust. We know our clients, we understand their needs, and we protect them from the kind of scrutiny that comes from lazy, one-size-fits-all enforcement. Applause rippled through the room. Miller took a small bow, then opened the floor for questions. Several hands went up. He pointed to a man in the front row wearing a Morgan Stanley badge. "How do you balance compliance requirements with client service?" the man asked. Miller's smile widened. "That's the art of it," Miller said. "Compliance is important, obviously. We have regulatory obligations. But we also have a duty to our clients not to subject them to unnecessary friction. The key is experienced judgment, knowing which risks are real and which are just regulatory theater." More applause. Miller was in his element, performing expertise and confidence for an audience that wanted to believe in both. Near the back of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a marble column, Naomi stood with a glass of sparkling water. She wore a navy dress, understated jewelry, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look simultaneously elegant and severe. No one had questioned her presence. The summit was technically open to anyone willing to pay the registration fee, and her credentials, carefully vague on the name badge, suggested she belonged. She watched Miller work the room after his presentation, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, positioning himself as both wise elder and innovative thinker. At one point, he noticed her. Their eyes met across the crowd, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, confusion that she would dare show her face in his world. He excused himself from the group he was talking to and walked over. "Ms. Clark," Miller said. His voice was pleasant, but his eyes were hard. "I'm surprised to see you here. I wouldn't have thought this was your scene." "I'm interested in wealth management compliance," Naomi said evenly. "Your presentation was very informative." "Was it?" Miller said. "Not a question." "I hope you're not harboring any hard feelings about our decision regarding your wire transfer. It was purely a business judgment, nothing personal." "Of course," Naomi said. She took a small sip of water. "Though I was curious about something. Do you apply the same business judgment to all clients or just some?" Miller's smile tightened slightly. "I'm not sure what you're implying," Miller said. "I'm not implying anything," Naomi said. "I'm asking a direct question about your compliance standards." "Our standards are the highest in the industry," Miller said. A young woman in a Prescott and Bain polo shirt had appeared at his elbow, looking nervous, but he waved her off. "We turn away business all the time when we have concerns about reputational risk or regulatory exposure." "Even when your own compliance department approves it?" Naomi asked. "Especially then," Miller said. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "Compliance officers are trained to be cautious, but they lack the strategic vision that senior leadership brings. They see paperwork, we see relationships, we see long-term risk." "And you saw long-term risk in a charitable foundation with 6 years of audited financials?" Naomi asked. Miller's jaw tightened. "I saw a transaction that didn't fit our client profile," Miller said. "I made a judgment call. That's what leaders do, Ms. Clark. We make hard decisions that others don't have the courage to make." Behind him, the young woman in the polo shirt was holding a phone, her face pale. She caught Miller's eye and gestured urgently. He held up one finger. "Wait," then turned back to Naomi. "If you're here to lobby for reconsideration, it's not going to happen," Miller said. "Prescott and Bain has moved on. I'd suggest you do the same." He gave her a final dismissive smile. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual clients to attend to," Miller said. Naomi turned slightly so the nearest circle of listeners could hear her without strain. "One last question for the room," Naomi said. Her voice was even, unhurried. "As a matter of standards, would rejecting a fully documented charitable foundation wire while fast-tracking a new offshore fund in the same week qualify as best-in-class compliance, or just strategic vision?" Faces turned. A man with a conference badge paused mid-sip. A woman from a regional bank frowned, waiting for the answer. Miller's smile thinned. "We do not discuss hypotheticals," Miller said. His tone was airy, but the tendons in his neck stood out. "And reputable firms do not let gossip masquerade as policy. What kind of indicators would make that offshore fund high risk?" the man with the badge asked. His voice carried farther than he intended. Generic example, Naomi said. Beneficial ownership split across 3 high-risk jurisdictions. Vague bank references that confirm nothing. A correspondent relationship in a weak control venue. Any strong program would pause for enhanced review. Miller's eyes flicked to the people listening. His smile came back, tighter. Every case is unique, Miller said. Experienced leadership knows when to avoid unnecessary friction. That's why clients trust us. Several attendees exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "That's not how our counsel trains us." Miller shifted his weight as if to end the exchange. He walked away. The young woman rushed to his side, holding out the phone, speaking rapidly. Naomi watched his expression change. Confusion, then concern, then something that looked like the first stirring of fear. His face went pale. His hand reached for the phone, gripped it, lifted it to his ear. She could see his mouth moving, see the color draining from his face, see his free hand clench into a fist at his side. Naomi set down her water glass and left the ballroom. She'd seen enough. The machinery was in motion now, grinding forward with the inexorable weight of federal authority. Miller could feel it starting, could sense that something had shifted, but he didn't know what or how completely his world was about to collapse. She walked out into the November evening and caught a cab back to her hotel. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. All agencies coordinated. Simultaneous execution tomorrow, 9 a.m. She typed back, acknowledged. Then she turned off her phone, lay down on the hotel bed fully clothed, and slept the sleep of someone who'd done what needed doing and was waiting for the consequences to catch up. The email hit Theodore's inbox at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday, marked urgent, subject line simply, "Hold all transactions." He opened it with shaking hands. All outbound wire transfers, all client onboarding approvals, all investment instructions are hereby suspended pending regulatory inquiry. Do not discuss this hold with clients or with anyone outside the compliance department. Further instructions to follow. It was signed by Linda Chen and countersigned by the firm's general counsel. Theodore stood up slowly and looked over the cubicle walls. Every analyst in the department was staring at their screen with the same expression of confused dread. Linda's office door was closed, but through the glass he could see her on the phone. Her face gray, her free hand pressed against her forehead. His desk phone rang, internal line. "Jones," Theodore answered. "Theodore, it's Linda. Come to my office now." He walked on legs that felt numb. The other analysts watched him pass, their eyes following his movement like he was walking to an execution. Inside Linda's office, she gestured for him to close the door and sit down. "How much of this did you know?" Linda asked. "How much of what?" Theodore asked. She turned her laptop around. On the screen was a formal letter on U.S. Treasury Department letterhead, bearing the seal of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Theodore's eyes caught phrases as he scanned. Ongoing investigation. Willful BSA violations. Coordinated enforcement action. Whistleblower testimony. Imminent regulatory action. All transactions are on internal hold pending warrants and subpoenas, Linda said. Federal agents are executing search and seizure under court orders. Counsel has ordered a firm-wide suspension of outbound wires, onboarding, and investment instructions. Do not discuss this hold with clients or with anyone outside the department. Theodore's mouth had gone dry. "Linda," he started. "The Clark Foundation wire," Linda interrupted. She was looking at him steadily. "The one Miller rejected. You flagged it as clean." "It was clean," Theodore said. "I know," Linda said. Her voice was very quiet. "And the Cayman fund that Miller pushed through? The one you documented concerns about?" "It went through 2 days ago," Theodore said. "I know." Linda closed the laptop carefully as though it might break. "Theodore, I need you to tell me the truth. Did you contact the regulators?" He met her eyes. "Yes," Theodore said. She let out a long breath and leaned back in her chair. "Okay," Linda said. "Okay, I need you to not be in this building for the next 72 hours. Call in sick, take personal days, I don't care. You're a protected whistleblower, but I don't want Miller or any of the partners cornering you before the attorneys get everything sorted." "What's going to happen?" Theodore asked. "I don't know," Linda said, "but it's bad. Really bad." She stood up and walked to the window, looked down at the street below. "Theodore, you did the right thing. I want you to remember that no matter what happens next. You did your job the way you were supposed to do it, and you reported wrongdoing when you saw it. That's what compliance officers are supposed to do." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Go home," Linda said. "I'll call you when it's safe to come back." Theodore grabbed his coat and walked through the compliance department, past analysts who were starting to cry, past supervisors who were frantically printing documents, past the coffee station where someone had knocked over a mug and no one was cleaning it up. The carpet was stained dark brown, spreading slowly. He took the elevator to the lobby. The scene stopped him cold. The marble space was filled with people in dark suits, badges visible on their belts. Federal agents, attorneys, someone from the SEC's enforcement division wearing a lanyard that said staff. Boxes of documents were being carried out on hand trucks. Laptops were being cataloged and tagged, each one placed in a clear evidence bag with a chain of custody form attached. And at the security desk, refusing to sign some kind of custody form, was Miller. His face was flushed, his silver hair disheveled. His $1,000 suit looked rumpled, the tie loosened, the collar unbuttoned. He was arguing with a woman in a navy pantsuit, his voice rising to fill the lobby the same way it had when he dismissed Naomi. "This is outrageous," Miller said. "I demand to speak with my attorney. You can't just walk in here and seize—" "We can and we did," the woman said calmly. She held up a document, official seal visible. "Everything is in the warrant. You can read it or you can wait for your counsel, but either way, these materials are coming with us." "This is harassment," Miller said. "This is a fishing expedition. We're a respected firm with a spotless—" "Your firm rejected a fully documented charitable wire transfer while simultaneously approving a high-risk transaction with insufficient due diligence," the woman said. Her voice remained level, professional, devastating in its precision. "That pattern suggests willful BSA violations and potential discriminatory practices. The warrant is valid. The seizure is lawful. Step back, please." An agent lifted a hand and the room seemed to hold its breath as the interior doors opened again. Naomi stepped into the lobby with 2 federal agents at her side. The receptionist froze. The security guard straightened. A junior intern put a hand to her mouth. Miller turned toward her, color draining as recognition set in. "First," Naomi said, her voice calm and even, "I am here in an official capacity with the United States Treasury, working within an interagency anti-money laundering operation." "Second," Naomi said, and she let the silence sit for a beat, "I am the director of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network." A murmur ran across the marble. The receptionist's eyes widened. The security guard looked from Naomi to Miller and back again. Mr. Jones pressed his palm flat against the partition, his jaw unsteady, relief and fear mixing in his eyes. And finally, Naomi said, "Your firm denied a clean, fully documented test wire with bias while you approved a dirty transaction that we traced hop by hop, through your custodian, through 3 correspondents, into the ultimate beneficiary account. Your own analyst documented your pressure to push it through. That pattern is willful. That pattern is unlawful. And that pattern is now fully documented." Miller opened his mouth, then closed it. His throat moved, his hands hovered, empty. "Sir, step back," the lead agent said. Her tone remained professional. "We are continuing lawful seizure and evidence collection pursuant to the warrant." 2 agents took gentle hold of Miller's elbows and guided him across the same stretch of marble where he had tossed Naomi's folder. The receptionist watched, pale. The intern stared. The security guard's gaze settled on Naomi with something like respect. The lobby that had hosted a humiliation now hosted its answer. Theodore felt his phone buzzing in his pocket. He looked at Naomi. She met his eyes and gave a single steady nod. No flourish, no gloat, just acknowledgement. Theodore turned and walked out into the November evening. His hands were shaking so hard he had to try 3 times to unlock his phone. When he finally managed, he pulled up the secure whistleblower portal and sent a 2-word message. "Thank you." The response came back within a minute. "You did this. We just documented it. Stay safe." He walked to the subway station, descended into the warm, dirty air, and sat on a bench waiting for the train. Around him, people scrolled through phones, listened to music, lived their ordinary lives. None of them knew that 6 blocks away, one of the most prestigious wealth management firms in Manhattan was being systematically dismantled by the machinery of federal enforcement. When the train came, Theodore got on and found a seat. He put his head in his hands and felt the tears come, hot and silent, relief and terror mixed together until he couldn't tell which was which. The coordination meeting happened at 7 a.m. the next morning in the same federal building war room, but now the table was crowded with attorneys from DOJ, enforcement staff from the SEC, examiners from the OCC, and representatives from the New York State Department of Financial Services. Naomi sat at the head of the table, a binder open in front of her containing documentation that had taken 3 weeks to assemble and a lifetime of experience to understand. Marcus Chen walked them through the timeline, his voice steady and methodical. The test wire, the Clark Foundation transaction, was submitted with full EDD documentation on November 3rd, Marcus said. Approved by Prescott and Bain's compliance department on November 4th after standard enhanced due diligence protocols. Miller personally rejected it on November 5th in a public setting, using language that made his bias explicit. The rejection was documented by multiple witnesses and confirmed by internal email. Jennifer Moss continued, pulling up a screen projection. 2 days later, the high-risk client transaction was submitted, Jennifer said. Source of funds documentation was vague. Beneficial ownership chain included entities in 3 different high-risk jurisdictions. OFAC screening was negative, but only because the names were structured to avoid direct hits. The compliance analyst, Theodore Jones, flagged multiple concerns requiring enhanced review. And, asked the SEC attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Flores. Miller pushed it through in under 24 hours, Jennifer said. She clicked to the next slide, showing email excerpts. Quote, "We can't spook the whale with too many questions." Quote, "Compliance needs to stop being a daycare for paranoid analysts." Quote, "Process the transaction and let the correspondent banks worry about due diligence." The room was silent except for the hum of the projector. David Okoye spoke next, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent 20 years prosecuting financial crime. The test wire included a unique routing signature embedded in the SWIFT message, David said. When the high-risk transaction processed, we were able to trace every hop through the payment system, their custodian bank, 3 correspondent banks, the ultimate beneficiary account in Cyprus. The trail is complete. The transaction cleared with insufficient due diligence at multiple points, and Prescott and Bain's pressure on their custodian is documented in recorded phone calls and email chains. If needed, we can also recommend targeted special measures under Title 31 of the U.S. Code, Section 5318A. Several attorneys glanced at each other. One swallowed, then nodded. "So we have bias in client selection and willful BSA failures," Patricia said. "What's the criminal exposure?" The DOJ attorney, a quiet man named James Chen, who'd built his reputation on complex fraud cases, leaned forward. "We have evidence of false statements to regulators in prior exam responses," James said. "We have possible obstruction in the form of pressure on compliance staff to alter documentation. And we have a pattern of conduct that suggests conscious avoidance of legal obligations. If we want to pursue criminal charges, we have sufficient predication." Naomi spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the technical discussion like a knife through silk. "FinCEN is pursuing civil money penalties for willful and systemic violations of Bank Secrecy Act requirements," Naomi said. "The pattern shows deliberate indifference to AML controls when it suited commercial interests. We're coordinating with OCC on custodian bank supervisory action. They'll be issuing a consent order requiring enhanced monitoring and possible restrictions. SEC has the investment advisor sanctions. DOJ makes the call on criminal prosecution." "What's your recommendation?" James asked, looking at Naomi directly. "I want him unable to practice," Naomi said. "I want the firm dismantled. I want every other wealth management shop in Manhattan to see what happens when you weaponize compliance discretion to serve prejudice. Criminal prosecution is your decision, but from an enforcement perspective, the civil penalties and industry bar will accomplish the systemic deterrence we need." Patricia nodded slowly. "The investment advisor sanctions can include a lifetime bar from the industry." Patricia said, "We'd need to prove unfitness, but this pattern of bias coupled with compliance failures and false statements gives us a strong case. The administrative proceeding can move quickly, 30 to 60 days to a hearing, another 30 for a decision." "Do it," Naomi said. "The point is to make it impossible for him to simply resign from Prescott and Bain and resurface at another firm. The point is to end his career completely." Around the table, people were nodding. This wasn't about revenge. No one was smiling. No one looked gleeful. This was about the systematic application of regulatory authority to behavior that had been allowed to fester for too long. This was about making the system work the way it was designed to work. "The custodian bank?" asked the OCC examiner, a woman named Sarah Kim. "They're cooperating fully," Marcus said. "They'll be terminating their relationship with Prescott and Bain effective immediately and implementing enhanced monitoring of their remaining investment advisor clients. They're also providing evidence of pressure tactics that Miller used to push transactions through their compliance reviews, recorded calls, email chains, the whole package." "Investors?" someone asked. "We've briefed the major institutional clients through their counsel," Jennifer said. "They're pulling funds. The board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. By end of business today, Prescott and Bain will have lost 60% of its assets under management." Naomi closed her binder with a decisive snap. Let's be clear about sequencing, Naomi said. Today, FinCEN issues its public enforcement action with civil money penalties. $15 million against the firm, $5 million personally against Miller. SEC files its administrative proceeding seeking lifetime bar. DOJ executes its additional seizure warrants and grand jury subpoenas for a potential criminal investigation. State securities regulators coordinate parallel actions. By end of business today, Prescott and Bain is effectively shut down, and Miller is personally barred from the industry pending the administrative hearing. And the whistleblower? James asked. Theodore Jones remains under full protection, O'David said. His identity stays sealed unless he chooses to reveal it. FinCEN will be issuing a public statement recognizing the crucial role of confidential whistleblowers in detecting and reporting financial crime, but no names, no identifying details. James looked at Naomi carefully. Director, I want to make sure we're not overreaching, James said. The bias element here is clear and documented, but we need to make sure every element of the enforcement action stands on its legal merits, independent of the discrimination issue. It does, Naomi said. Her voice was steel. That's why we spent 3 weeks documenting it. Every transaction record, every email, every witness statement, every recorded call. This isn't about punishing someone for being racist. This is about shutting down a firm that weaponized compliance discretion to serve prejudice while simultaneously accepting genuinely risky business. The racism is the motive. The BSA violations are the crime. The false statements to regulators are additional crimes. Everything we're doing is grounded in statute, regulation, and established enforcement precedent. Good, James said. Let's execute. The press release hit the wires at 10:17 a.m., simultaneously distributed by FinCEN, the SEC, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Financial Crimes Enforcement. Network assesses $15 million civil penalty against Prescott and Bain for willful bank secrecy. Act violations. Securities and Exchange Commission files. Administrative proceedings seeking lifetime industry bar against firm principal Richard Miller. U.S. Attorney's Office. Executes search warrants as part of ongoing criminal investigation into false statements and obstruction. Within an hour, every major financial news outlet had picked up the story. Bloomberg ran it as breaking news. The Wall Street Journal posted an analysis piece within 90 minutes. CNBC had legal experts on air discussing the implications for the wealth management industry. By noon, clients were calling to redeem their investments. By 2 p.m., the board had locked Miller out of his email and was meeting in emergency session. By 4 p.m., 3 more senior partners had tendered their resignations. Miller sat in a conference room on the 41st floor surrounded by 3 attorneys from a white-collar defense firm that charged $800 an hour. His phone kept lighting up with calls and texts that he couldn't answer. His hands were shaking visibly. "They're going to make an example of me," Miller said. "They already are," said the lead attorney, Patricia Hammond, a woman who had the kind of face that gave nothing away. "The question is whether we can negotiate a settlement that keeps you out of prison and minimizes your personal financial exposure." "Prison?" Miller's voice cracked. "I didn't steal money. I didn't commit fraud. I made business judgments." "You rejected a clean transaction based on apparent racial bias and approved a dirty transaction for commercial reasons," Patricia said. Her voice was flat, clinical. "Then you pressured your compliance staff to approve questionable clients. Then you made false statements to regulators and examination responses about your compliance practices. The business judgment defense doesn't cover discrimination or willful violations of federal law." "The Clark woman, she set me up," Miller said. "This was entrapment. She came in there specifically to—" "She submitted a legitimate wire transfer request with full documentation," Patricia interrupted. "You chose to reject it using language that multiple witnesses will testify was racially motivated. That's not entrapment. That's you making a choice that was consistent with a pattern of conduct that your own compliance staff documented over several years." Miller put his head in his hands. "My career," Miller said, "my reputation, everything I built, is gone," Patricia said. "The SEC is seeking a lifetime bar? Even if we fight it, the best we can hope for is a lengthy suspension, and that's if we can somehow convince an administrative law judge that all of this was just unfortunate coincidence. No firm will touch you after this. The question now is whether we can keep you from facing criminal prosecution." "What do they want?" Miller asked. "Full cooperation," Patricia said. "Complete transparency. Records of any other clients who were rejected or approved based on similar criteria. and probably your testimony against any other Prescott and Bain principals who were involved in similar conduct. Miller looked up sharply. Linda Chen, Miller said, the compliance director. She signed off on everything. Patricia shook her head slowly. No, Patricia said. She documented her objections. Her emails show she raised concerns repeatedly and was overruled by senior leadership, specifically by you. We have email chains where she explicitly warned you that approving the Cayman Fund without enhanced due diligence could constitute a BSA violation. You told her to process it anyway. If anything, she's a witness for the prosecution. Then who? Miller stopped. His face went pale. The analyst, Jones, the one in the lobby that day. He must have gone to the regulators. If he did, he's protected under federal whistleblower statutes, Patricia said. You can't touch him, you can't retaliate, and if you try, you'll add witness tampering and obstruction to your problems. Don't even think about it. Miller's phone lit up again. He looked at it. The board chairman calling for the 7th time. He let it go to voicemail. How much is the penalty? Miller asked quietly. For the firm, $15 million, and Patricia said. Personally, the SEC can seek disgorgement of any ill-gotten gains, plus civil penalties. Based on the enforcement action, we're looking at probably $5 to $8 million out of your own pocket, potentially more if they can trace specific transactions to your personal compensation, like plus legal fees, which at this point could run another $2 to $3 million before we're done. Miller did the math in his head. His savings, his investments, his brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, his place in the Hamptons. He'd be left with nearly nothing. And if we fight, Miller asked, then you spend the next 5 years in litigation, hemorrhage money on legal fees, and probably lose anyway because the documentary evidence is overwhelming. Patricia said, Miller, they have your emails. They have your client files. They have recorded phone calls. They have a complete trace of the wire transaction that you pushed through after rejecting the clean one. They have witness testimony from your own compliance staff, including detailed contemporaneous notes. This case is airtight. Miller's throat felt tight. Who's running this? Miller asked. At FinCEN. Who's the director? Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a copy of the formal enforcement order. She slid it across the table. At the bottom, above the official seal, was a signature line in clear black ink. Naomi Clark, Director, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Miller stared at the name. Clark, Miller said. That's her name, the woman with the foundation wire. Yes, Patricia said. She's the director of FinCEN? Miller's voice was barely a whisper. She has been for 3 years, Patricia said. Before that, she spent 20 years building the enforcement infrastructure that's now being used to dismantle your career. She's considered one of the foremost experts on Bank Secrecy Act enforcement in the country. She's testified before Congress. She's written the training manuals that compliance officers use. She's the architect of the system that just caught you. Miller felt the room tilt. She came to my office, Miller said. She stood in my lobby. I threw her folder on the floor. I called her money dirty. I said, he couldn't finish. Yes, Patricia said. She was there to see if you would actually do what your compliance violations and the whistleblower testimony suggested you'd been doing. You did. And then she documented it, built a case, coordinated with 5 different federal agencies, and dismantled your career using the exact procedures and authorities she spent 2 decades building. This was a setup, Miller said. This was enforcement, Patricia said. You just didn't recognize it because you were too busy assuming she was nobody. You saw a black woman with a wire request and you treated her with contempt. You didn't see the director of FinCEN conducting an undercover compliance test. That's not entrapment. That's you revealing exactly who you are when you think there are no consequences. Miller sat in silence. Through the window, he could see the Manhattan skyline, the city where he'd built his reputation, where people knew his name and respected his judgment. All of it was disappearing like smoke. What do I do? Miller asked finally. You cooperate, Patricia said. You settle with FinCEN, probably for a reduced penalty if you provide substantial assistance. You don't fight the SEC lifetime bar because fighting it will cost you everything and you'll lose anyway. You pay the penalties. You testify if they need you against other principals, and you pray that DOJ decides the civil enforcement is sufficient and doesn't pursue criminal charges. How long? Miller asked. The administrative hearing is scheduled in 6 weeks, Patricia said. Settlement negotiations can happen in parallel. If you cooperate fully, we might be able to resolve everything in 90 days. If you fight, it'll drag on for years and cost you everything. Miller's phone lit up again. A text from his wife asking if the news stories were real, asking if they needed to call their financial advisor, asking if everything was going to be okay. He turned the phone off. Theodore's phone rang at 8 p.m. that evening. He'd been sitting in his apartment watching the news coverage on his laptop, feeling like he was floating outside his own body. Every major outlet was running the story. Every financial blog was analyzing the enforcement action. His name wasn't mentioned anywhere, but he knew. He knew that his documentation, his emails, his careful notes had been the foundation of everything that was happening. Theodore Jones? The voice was professional, calm, female. Yes, Theodore said. This is Director Clark from FinCEN, Naomi said. I wanted to call you personally to thank you for your courage. Theodore felt his throat tighten. I just did my job, Theodore said. You did more than that, Naomi said. You documented systemic wrongdoing and reported it despite the personal risk. That's not just anything. That's integrity under pressure. That's what makes the system work. Is it true, Theodore asked, about the lifetime bar? The SEC is seeking it, Naomi said. Miller can fight it, but the evidence is overwhelming. The administrative law judge will review everything, the emails, the transaction records, the witness statements. He'll never work in financial services again. Theodore was quiet for a moment. He saw me, Theodore said, in the lobby yesterday. When they were serving the warrants, he looked at me like he knew. He can't touch you, Naomi said. You're a protected whistleblower under federal law. If he or anyone else retaliates against you in any way, they'll face additional criminal exposure. And we're monitoring the situation. If anything happens, anything at all, you contact us immediately. What about Prescott and Bain? Theodore asked. What happens to the firm? The board is meeting right now to discuss dissolution, Naomi said. Most of the institutional clients have already redeemed their investments. The custodian bank has severed the relationship. In practical terms, the firm is finished. Whether they formally dissolve or try to restructure under new leadership, it won't be the same entity, and frankly, the reputational damage is too severe. They're done. Theodore felt tears on his face and didn't try to stop them. I keep thinking about that day in the lobby, Theodore said. The way he talked to you, the way everyone just watched. I know, Naomi said. Her voice was gentle now, losing some of its professional edge. That's what made it real for me, too. Not the compliance violations. I see those every day in reports and examination findings. But the contempt, the certainty that he could treat someone that way and face no consequences. That's what systemic bias looks like. It's not always loud. Usually it's just quiet cruelty dressed up as professionalism. Will anything actually change? Theodore asked. Some things will, Naomi said. The enforcement action sends a message to other firms that compliance discretion can't be a cover for discrimination. The penalties will make boards nervous. The publicity will make senior leaders think twice. But real change happens slowly, case by case, because people like you refuse to let wrongdoing stay hidden. You create the documentary record. You make the phone call. You take the risk. That's how systems change, one brave person at a time. Theodore wiped his eyes. What happens now? Theodore asked. For me? You go back to work when you're ready, Naomi said. Linda Chen is a good supervisor. She protected you when it mattered, documented everything properly, gave you the cover you needed to do your job. You continue building your career. You learn from this. And someday, when you're the compliance director, you remember what it felt like to be the junior analyst who had to choose between his career and his conscience. And you make sure the people who work for you never have to make that choice alone. Thank you, Theodore said, for listening, for acting, for all of it. Thank you for being brave, Naomi replied. It's people like you who make the system work. Remember that. After they hung up, Theodore sat in his apartment and cried for 20 minutes. Great heaving sobs of relief and exhaustion, and something like hope. Then he washed his face, made dinner, and went to bed early. Tomorrow he'd start thinking about the future. Tonight, he just needed to rest. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. When it ended, Prescott and Bain issued a terse press release announcing Miller's immediate resignation, the departure of 3 other senior partners, and the firm's intention to cooperate fully with all ongoing investigations. The next morning, the firm announced it was ceasing new business and returning client assets in an orderly wind-down. By the end of the week, Prescott and Bain was effectively defunct. The formal SEC administrative hearing happened 6 weeks later in a sterile government hearing room with fluorescent lights and cheap carpet. Miller's attorneys made their arguments about business judgment and lack of discriminatory intent. They presented character witnesses. They argued that the enforcement action was disproportionate, that Miller had made mistakes but not willful violations. The administrative law judge, a woman in her 60s with 30 years on the bench, listened politely. She reviewed the documentary evidence methodically. She heard testimony from Linda Chen, from 2 other compliance officers, from the custodian bank's risk management director. She reviewed the email chains, the recorded phone calls, the transaction records, and then she issued a ruling that took 45 minutes to read aloud. The lifetime bar was granted. Miller had demonstrated unfitness to serve in any capacity in the securities industry through a pattern of conduct that included willful BSA violations, discrimination in client selection, pressure on compliance staff to circumvent controls, false statements to regulators in examination responses, and obstruction of regulatory oversight. The ban was immediate, permanent, and without possibility of petition for reinstatement. Miller sat motionless as the judge explained the reasoning, her voice steady and dispassionate, each sentence building an edifice of professional disgrace that would follow him for the rest of his life. Outside the hearing room, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. Miller walked past them without speaking, his face gray, his movements mechanical. His attorneys issued a statement saying they were reviewing their options for appeal, but everyone knew it was over. The appeals process would take years and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the documentary evidence was too strong. The decision would stand. 3 months later, Naomi stood in a different bank lobby, this one in Midtown, smaller, less ostentatious, run by a regional institution with a solid reputation and no history of compliance failures. She was there to execute the wire transfer that had started everything. $1 million to the Clark Foundation for literacy programs and healthcare clinics. The branch manager, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, processed the transaction personally. "I read about what happened," the manager said quietly as she reviewed the documentation. "About Prescott and Bain. About what that man said to you." "It's done now," Naomi said. "My daughter is starting college next year," the manager said. She smiled as she entered the wire instructions into her computer. She wants to study compliance and financial regulation. She read about the case in her business ethics class. It's required reading now at several universities. The manager looked up from her screen. "She said she wants to be like you," the manager said. Naomi felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Tell her it's not glamorous," Naomi said. "Most of the time it's just reading transaction reports and following paper trails, sitting in meetings, reviewing documentation, the boring work of maintaining systems. But sometimes you catch someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them. Someone who thinks power means immunity. And that makes all the boring parts worth it." The wire processed without incident. Naomi received a confirmation receipt and tucked it into her briefcase. The manager shook her hand warmly. "Good luck with the foundation's work," the manager said. "What you're doing matters." "Thank you," Naomi said. Outside, the March afternoon was cold but bright. The sky that hard winter blue that promised spring eventually. She walked 2 blocks to a small cafe and ordered coffee, then sat by the window and pulled out her phone. There were photos from the foundation's staff. New tablets delivered to an after-school program in Baltimore, a mobile health clinic ready to launch in rural Virginia, scholarship checks being presented to 4 high school seniors who would be the first in their families to attend college. She scrolled through the images slowly, letting herself feel the satisfaction. Not triumph, she was too experienced for that, too aware that the next case was already building somewhere, that there would always be another Miller, another firm that confused standards with prejudice. But satisfaction. The knowledge that the system had worked, that justice had been possible. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Chen. "Press conference set for tomorrow 10 a.m. You ready?" She typed back, "Ready." The press conference took place in the main briefing room at the Treasury Department, beneath the official seal, in front of a backdrop that said, "Financial Crimes Enforcement Network," in crisp blue letters. Naomi wore the same charcoal suit she'd worn to Prescott and Bain that first day, a deliberate choice. The room was full. Reporters from the major outlets, bloggers who covered financial crime, law students taking notes, compliance professionals who'd followed the case, and in the back, partially hidden but unmistakable, Theodore Jones. He'd asked to attend, and Naomi had arranged for a visitor's pass. She stepped to the podium and waited for the room to quiet. 3 months ago, Naomi began, FinCEN coordinated with the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, federal banking regulators, and state authorities to take enforcement action against Prescott and Bain and its senior leadership for willful and systemic violations of the Bank Secrecy Act. Today, I want to talk about what that case means and why it matters. Financial crime enforcement exists to protect the integrity of the financial system. We trace money laundering networks, we identify sanctions evasion, we track terrorist financing. We do this through partnerships with financial institutions that are required by law to know their customers, monitor transactions, and report suspicious activity. This system only works when those institutions take their obligations seriously. But compliance isn't just about catching criminals, it's about ensuring that legitimate customers, people who've earned their money honestly, who want to use the financial system for lawful purposes, have equal access to services. When compliance discretion becomes a cover for bias, when standards become code for discrimination, the system fails. Not just for the person who's turned away, but for everyone who depends on fair and equal treatment. The Prescott and Bain case involved a pattern of conduct where legitimate transactions were rejected based on the client's background, while questionable transactions were approved for commercial reasons. That's not compliance. That's corruption of the compliance function. And when we have evidence that it's happening, we will use every tool available to stop it. This case resulted in a $15 million civil penalty against the firm, a $5 million penalty against the senior executive personally, the dissolution of a major investment firm, and a lifetime bar for a senior executive who put his prejudices ahead of his legal obligations. But more importantly, it sent a message. No one is above the law. No institution is too prestigious to face consequences. And no amount of wealth or reputation will shield you if you weaponize the compliance system to serve discrimination. I want to recognize the whistleblowers who made this case possible. I can't name them. That's the nature of protected disclosures. But their courage and integrity are the foundation of everything we achieved. They documented wrongdoing at personal risk. They trusted the system to act, and the system did. Naomi paused and looked directly at Theodore, who was staring at her with eyes that were bright with tears. To anyone working in compliance who sees something wrong, document it, report it. We will listen, we will investigate. And if the evidence supports it, we will act. To any institution that thinks compliance is just about checking boxes, it's not. It's about culture. It's about leadership. It's about treating every customer with the same professionalism and scrutiny, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. And to anyone who's been turned away from a financial institution for reasons that had nothing to do with risk and everything to do with bias. I see you. The system sees you. And we're working to make sure that what happened at Prescott and Bain becomes impossible anywhere else. She took a breath and allowed herself the smallest smile. Justice isn't always fast, Naomi said. But when it comes, it should be thorough. Thank you. The questions came rapid fire about penalties, about other investigations, about whether more cases like this were pending, about the role of whistleblowers, about best practices for compliance programs. Naomi answered each one with precision, never gloating, never personal, always focused on the law and the evidence and the procedures that made enforcement possible. As the conference ended and reporters filed out, Theodore approached the front. Naomi stepped down from the podium to meet him. Thank you, Theodore said simply. You did the work, Naomi replied. I just made sure it counted. What you said about bias and compliance, about standards being used as code? Theodore's voice caught. That's exactly what it felt like, every day. Like I was watching something wrong happen and being told it was professional judgment. Now you know it wasn't just you, Naomi said. Now you have the evidence that your instincts were correct. And the next time you see something like that, you'll recognize it faster. You'll document it better. You'll know that speaking up isn't just possible, it's necessary. Theodore nodded. I'm going back to work on Monday, Theodore said. Linda Chen got promoted to Chief Compliance Officer at a new firm. Regional bank, solid reputation. She wants me to join her team as a senior analyst. Good, Naomi said. The system needs people like both of you. They shook hands, a formal gesture that carried the weight of mutual respect. And then Theodore left. Naomi watched him go. This young man who'd gambled his career on the belief that integrity mattered, who'd chosen to document the truth when silence would have been easier and safer. She gathered her notes and walked out of the briefing room. In the hallway, Marcus Chen was waiting with Jennifer Moss and David Okoye. How do you feel? Marcus asked. Tired, Naomi said. Satisfied. Ready for the next one. Always the next one, Jennifer said. Always, Naomi agreed. 6 months after the enforcement action, Naomi received a letter forwarded through FinCEN's general counsel's office. No return address, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. Miller's, shaky and smaller than it used to be, the writing of someone who'd lost their confidence along with everything else. Miss Clark, I'm writing to you not because I expect forgiveness, but because I need you to know I understand what I did. For 20 years, I told myself I was protecting my firm, that I was making sound business judgments, that the people I turned away, people like you, just didn't fit our client profile. I believed my own justifications. I thought standards was enough of a reason. I thought my position gave me the right to make those calls without accountability. But you were right. I used policy as a weapon. I used compliance as cover for contempt. And when I was finally confronted with my own bias, documented and undeniable, I tried to blame everyone except myself. I blamed compliance for being too cautious. I blamed regulators for being too aggressive. I blamed you for setting me up. But you didn't set me up. You gave me a choice, and I made it. The same choice I'd been making for years, just usually with less documentation and fewer witnesses. I lost my career, my reputation, my savings. I deserved to lose them. What I didn't deserve was the chance to understand what I'd actually done. Not just the compliance violations, but the human cost. The way I made you feel in that lobby. The way I made Theodore Jones and a dozen other junior analysts feel when they watched me mock and dismiss you. The message I sent that some people's money was clean and some people's money was suspect based on nothing more than the color of their skin. You didn't destroy my life. I did that the moment I chose arrogance over integrity, prejudice over policy, comfort over correctness. You just made sure I had to face the consequences. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm writing to say I finally understand why what I did was wrong. Not just legally wrong, but morally wrong. And if there's any lesson in this wreckage, it's that the system you built, the system that caught me, works. It should have worked sooner. It should have stopped me years ago, but at least it worked. I hope the foundation is doing well. I hope the scholarships help those kids. I hope you never think of me again. Richard Miller. Naomi read the letter twice, then filed it away in a locked drawer. She didn't respond. There was nothing to say, no absolution to offer, no redemption to grant. Miller would live with what he'd done, and that was enough. That was justice. She turned back to her desk where a new case file was waiting. A cryptocurrency exchange with questionable know-your-customer procedures and a pattern of accepting high-risk customers from sanctioned jurisdictions. The evidence was preliminary but promising. The investigation would take months, maybe years. But that was the work. That was always the work. She opened the file and began to read, her pen moving across the page, making notes in the margins, building the foundation for whatever came next. Outside her window, Washington hummed with the ordinary business of government. Bureaucrats and investigators and analysts doing the quiet work of holding the system together. Naomi smiled, small and private and satisfied, and got back to work. Justice didn't rest, and neither did she.